Hi, so let's talk about signs. When you see a new sign, you have to figure out what it means if you want to follow it. The same things happen when you run into a word that you are never seen before, or you just have to work out what it does. Every one of us takes up new words all the time from infancy onwards, but how do we actually learn what those words mean? So, all of us have tons and tons of words in our heads, in one language or across many. We rarely think about our individual words when we are trying to say them. They're just there in our heads, ready for us to express our thoughts. But at the same point, each and every one of those words had to be learned. This situation is made more complicated by the fact that the words that we use for things don't usually have anything to do with the things themselves, except for onomatopoeia, like plot or echo. Like there is nothing particularly wall-like about the word wall or peace. This concept is often called the arbitrariness of the linguistic sign, and the groundbreaking linguistic Ferdinand de Saussure came up with a century ago. The sounds of words just aren't predictable based on the information that we have about the world. That information needs to be stored somewhere, but where? Well, we can imagine that we have a kind of mental dictionary in our brains where we keep all information about words. We can call these mental files a lexical entry, and it contains everything you need to know about a word, how it's pronounced, and where it goes, and what it means. Let's look at an example. The lexical entry for the word hound tell you that it's a noun that's pronounced like hound, and it means large domesticated canine. For every language you speak, you fill up your brain with tens of thousands of these lexical entries, but how do you manage to build that dictionary up? Learning words is complicated, and in the real world, words are flying at you like a flock of ravens. The first thing you have to do is separate that stream of language into its component parts, and that's hard enough, but even when you do have those little chunks, your job's not over. You still need to map those phonological forms onto their meanings. But if meanings aren't predictable from the sounds, then how do you even do that? Here's a concrete example based on works of philosopher W.V.O. Quinn. So let's say you just happen to be standing around with a friend of yours, and a rabbit runs by. Your friend points at the rabbit and say, "Hodor." What does hodor mean? Well, maybe it means rabbit. That's a decent assumption. But if you think about a minute, it could also mean run, or fast, or dinner, or look over there. There's a huge list of things that hodor could mean. But you probably thought that it meant rabbit, right? Well, fortunately, that's one of the basic assumptions that pretty much everyone makes. So it's natural guess. Linguistics have figured out 4 easy tricks that people use to associate arbitrary sounds and symbols to meanings in the real world. The first of these guidelines is known as the whole object assumption. Now, this says that every news word that you encounter will probably refer to the whole object, and not one of its part of attributes. So hodor should mean rabbit, not just the rabbit's foot or fluffy. We have also got the type assumption. This means that a new word refers to a type of thing and not to any particular thing. So your friend pointing and say hodor probably doesn't mean, look, there's my pet rabbit hodor. So linguistics ran an experiment on 4 and 5-year-olds to test the type assumptions. they show them a picture of a cow and say, this is a duck, can you find another duck? And then they show them two other pictures, one of a pig and one of milk. Now cows and pigs go together by type, like if ducks meant barnyard animal or something, cows and milk aren't related by type. There is a theme there but nothing else. So what did kids pick? Well, those kids that were told that the cow was a duck picked the pig of the, so they definitely were preferring to interpret by type. But interestingly, when they weren't given a new label for things and they just got shown the cow and then told something like, look at this, now can you find another one? Kids only picked the pigs and quarter of the time. So they were really using the label to help them group things together. Another role we have in our world learning quiver is the basic level assumption. The idea here is that some categories are more fundamental than other. So a word like rabbit is basic level category, whereas words like mammal or animal are higher level categories. We usually assume that a new word will apply to a basic level idea. So Hodor probably doesn't mean mammal. We've got one more weapon when it comes to picking up new words. Let's say you manage to learn that Hodor really did mean rabbit, but the next day you run into your friends again and he's holding his new pet rabbit and he's saying something different like Hodor, Bodor. Now, will you think about Bodor means rabbit? Not if you follow the mutual exclusivity assumption. This say that objects have just one label. So maybe Bodor means something like soft or fluffy, or it could be the rabbit's name, but it won't just mean rabbit. So let's look at an example. Imagine an experiment where kids get shown two things like a tree and then a shiny funky new object they have never seen before. Then you ask them, show me the zip. They are not going to point at the tree because they already know that trees are trees. They nearly always assign the new label to the new object because they assume that terms are mutually exclusive. This is so powerful that it can actually override the other assumptions, which we will talk about back on your website. Okay, so that's the big stuff, but there are a few other things that we can use if those four assumptions don't give us all the information we need. For example, we can use the information we already have about syntax and morphology for our language. So, for example, we already know that usually get stuck on nouns to make them plural, or that common nouns can get preceded by determiners like to the. We've got some cool experiment about this too. So researchers showed some kids who were about a year and a half old some dolls, and the similar two dolls look similar, but they only talk about one of them, making the other doll really jealous. For some other kids, they say this is a Zaf with the determiner stuck in there. Other kids were just told this is Zaf without a. After a while of this, researchers asked the kid to put some dress-up clothes on the doll. If they would be hearing this is Zaf, then they were asked to the dress Zaf, and they only went to dress that one particular doll. But if they been hearing a Zaf, then then they were asked to dress a Zaf, and then they would dress either that one doll or the other doll. Both of them were okay because they would be using that little a the whole time. Little kids who weren't even two and had never studied any grammar already knew that proper nouns refer to one individuals and don't take a, whereas common nouns refers to a type of thing and do. Before we wrap up, let's go back to our idea about lexical entries. We already said that they have information about pronunciation and meaning in them, as well as whether they are a noun or a verb or whatever. But now we can add some more information. Lexical entries include facts about what situations a word can show up in, like is a morpheme free to stand on its own, or does it have to get bound to something in order to show up? Does it need to have a determiner like a or not, stuff like that. Oh, and then you have to wonder about plurals, like do you have to separate lexical entries for spear and spears, or do you have just one? Well, the kind of plurals that you mix just by adding an s, just use a rule that people store in their heads, even little kids. Remember the book test that we talked about back in episode 21? You show a kid a drawing of some unfamiliar creature and tell them it's a bug. Then you show them two of them and ask them what they are called. Kids will usually say two bugs with as even though they never heard the words book before. So this means that plurals along with a whole bunch of other things are stored separately in our brains from the mental dictionary. We don't need multiple lexical entries for spear and spears, or for dragon and dragons. We only have the one, and our rules take care of the rest. So even if Hodor is causing you some problems, you can use these assumptions to work out what your friend is trying to get across. You build your mental dictionary using these strategies, and you solve the problem of what meanings go where without ever even really thinking about it much. That's just another sign of how well our minds are built for language. So we've got reached the end of the link space for this week. If you assigned the right meanings to my songs, you learned that what words reverse isn't as obvious as you might think, that we construct our mental dictionary out of lexical entries with information about pronunciation, usage, and meaning that we use for assumptions to help us guide our task. Wall, object, type, basic level, and mutual exclusivity, and that things that are driven by rules sit outside the lexical entries for the words themselves. Okay, thank you very much. See you. Goodbye.